Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to fellowship today with you in the Baton Rouge Rotary Club. I really appreciate it. Every time I hear somebody read my bio, I'm like, who are they talking about? Because they couldn't possibly be talking about me. But again, I appreciate the great introduction. As mentioned in the introduction, my name is Syrita Steib. I grew up in Vacherie, Louisiana. Anybody from Vacherie, St. James Parish in the house? No? That's okay. I'm here. I'm representing. And I was in Thibodeau this morning, so pardon not getting here right at 12. But I'm always honored for an opportunity to come into a space and speak with folks that I don't necessarily have access to all of the time to really talk about the message and the work that we do. Blue Cross Blue Shield has been such a huge supporter of our lab assistant program, which I'll get into later, that we created here in the state of Louisiana to help women who have convictions or have been incarcerated to start moving into careers in the healthcare field, because that was my path after I was released. At the age of 19, I was incarcerated. I was on a full scholarship at Xavier University in physics and engineering. My mom was a judge. My dad was a supervisor at Marathon Oil Refinery. And I also was in the United States Navy. But what leads most women to prison, which led myself to prison, was trauma and not having it addressed. I was sexually assaulted at 16 and physically abused as a child. So I talk about this all the time everywhere. Sometimes I get emotional, sometimes I don't. But I try to just let the Lord use me and move in the way that I need to move. So I apologize. But not dealing with that trauma at the time and then going to the military. I don't know if I should have talked to somebody. I was diagnosed with PTSD at the age of 14 due to like my experiences, and nobody seemed to talk me out of joining the military and going to boot camp where it would be heightened at the time. So within, I guess, maybe about 3 months after I finished basic training, I was training to be an electronics tech because at the time women weren't allowed to go into the nuclear program, which I qualified for through my ASFAB. I was training to be an electronics tech, and I was stationed in Great Lakes, Illinois, and I committed a crime. I was prosecuted in the state of Texas, and I was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, 20 years in state prison, and $1.9 million in restitution at the age of 19, all for the same crime. So what I didn't understand at the time is that when you're arrested for making a bad choice or committing a crime, that essentially the rest of your life could be destroyed and it may not be any coming back from that conviction. In the state of Louisiana, currently, we have over 1 million people with a conviction. We incarcerate the most people per capita than anywhere in the world. So not just in the country, anywhere in the world. We provide the most punitive punishments than anywhere in the world, and yet we still are not any safer. When I was released from prison at the age of 29, back into New Orleans, I went to a halfway house. Of course, it was post-Katrina. It was new internet. I had no idea about Google, computers, or anything of the sort. I was released in 2009. And I was just told basically to go on my way and, figure it out with not any access to resources or anything of the sort. But I knew that because education had always come easy to me, I was able to take some college credits while I was incarcerated. That education I thought would be my key to be able to re-enter to society successfully. So as soon as I was released, I applied to the University of New Orleans, and I was denied. I put in my application, and within 24 hours, I got a denial and said that I could not go to school there. I knew it was because there's a box on the application that asks, had you been convicted of a felony in order to get into college? And I checked yes to the box. But in my mind, I just had no clue that me checking this box, I don't know if it was naivete or just me saying, oh, I did my time, I'm paying my restitution, I'm doing what I'm supposed to, I'll be able to go to school so I can change my life. But that wasn't the case. So for about 2 years, I did odds and ends. I worked construction. I started working for performance contractors, which is here in Baton Rouge or Turner, doing the turnaround thing and trying to make it. I found myself, I got married and I was pregnant, and I was like, I still want to go back to school. So I just used the same application, and the only change that I made on the application was that I unchecked the box. And when I unchecked the box, I had an acceptance within 24 hours in the same way that I had the denial within 24 hours. So I started my educational journey at the University of New Orleans, getting all of my prerequisites in order to go to school for clinical laboratory science. I wanted to go to med school. Again, nobody told me that once I went to prison and I got out and I tried to change my life, I would be denied access to careers. So I've always been a big dreamer. So I was like, yes, when I get out of prison, I had an education instructor inside of the prison. I told him, I said, I want to go to med school. And he had this big, laugh. Like it was the funniest thing anybody had ever told him. And he was like, well, when you graduate from med school, send your picture back with your cap and gown, and I'll post it in the hall, for everybody to see. And I was like, oh, he thinks this is funny. So that was my drive, and that was my bulletin board material, because I played sports all my life. So every time I got in a situation when I was in school, I was like, yeah, I got to send this back to Mr. Styles, because he didn't believe that I could, right? So I went to school, like I said, by unchecking the box. But what ended up happening was I met this professor. I was tutoring chemistry for him. And I'm like, Dr. Hauk, I'm in this situation where I need to go to medical school. I want to go to medical school, but I've lied to get into college. And he said something to me that struck me very differently. He said, oh my God, Syrita, you're amazing and you're awesome and you're super smart, and everything that he thought someone was in prison, he was telling me that I wasn't, that I was the opposite. He was like, I'm going to help you to overcome this so that you can go to medical school. And then he may have ended it with something like, because you're not like everyone else who's there. And that just didn't sit right with me. 95% of the women who are incarcerated are there for trauma. 75% of women who are incarcerated in the state of Louisiana have a diagnosed mental illness. And these are the women that are in prison. So not only was my family responsible for the woman that was standing in front of him at that time, but those women who took care of me and nurtured me for the 10 years that I was incarcerated was also responsible. And I just said that once I figure this out, I'm going to make sure that I create a blueprint so no one else has to go through what it is that I was going through. I didn't know what that meant at the time. But I ended up graduating. I got into LSU Health and Science Center. I got my degree in clinical laboratory science. I became a licensed and certified nationally clinical laboratory scientist, and I started working in the hospitals. I still had aspirations to go to med school, and I took the MCAT, started applying, but the questions around my criminal history continued to come up. So I decided at that time to no longer pursue my dreams of going to med school, and I started a nonprofit in New Orleans called Operation Restoration while I was working full-time at the hospital. But Louisiana was going through this justice reinvestment phase, and they were having these town halls about issues that were coming up for people and how we could begin to decarcerate our state, because, again, as I mentioned, we incarcerated the most people per capita than anywhere in the world. And I showed up at a town hall meeting, me and my son, we were in scrubs, and I listened to these presentations that they were giving. They had like a 50-page PowerPoint, and only one PowerPoint referenced women in the PowerPoint. So I went up to the mic. My son, if y'all ever have a chance to, meet him, he articulates his ideas and problems that he has very well. So I had to share the mic with him for about 5 minutes. And he talked to them about incarceration and the effect that it's had on him, even though he wasn't alive at the time. And I talked about how this conversation that you're having, when you think about incarceration, you don't think about women, you don't talk about women. And women, the incarceration rate of women has risen over 840% in the last 40 years. So when you think about that and you think about how you're criminalizing women today differently, mostly for mental health issues, drug abuse, trauma that's unreported, and nobody's talking about it. And after having that conversation, that began my legislative journey. We filed some legislation to remove the box off of the applications for our purposes of admissions. Here in Louisiana, we passed that legislation in 2017. Louisiana became the first state to remove questions off of college applications for purposes of admissions. We've done it in 7 states since then. And what that propelled me into is working on federal legislation. So I was contacted by the former administration to work on the First Step Act. So I worked with the Trump administration on the First Step Act, which was the only sentencing reform that had been passed in 40 years successfully. And due to the work that I did on that legislation, that is how I ended up with a full and conditional pardon. He left office, I think, January 20th at noon. I got a call midnight, 12:01 on the 20th, saying that I had received the pardon, which essentially wiped away restitution. So I told you all earlier I had been paying $1.9 million in restitution for 20 years. That took that away. That took away my conviction. And it literally changed my life, Every single day I woke up and I was fighting for everybody else. But in that one signature, it really took away the concerns that I had of legacy, my children not being able to have anything, what my quality of life was. Because every time that I ascended or did something personally to make my situation better, I was audited. I was called and my fine would increase and I would have to pay more money and I couldn't own anything in access. So even though I had been out of prison, about 11 years at the time, I still was dealing with it every day. My son was dealing with it every day. My family was dealing with it every day. My mom, who's an attorney who has worked hard her whole entire life, was struggling in her 70s with, when I create a will, I need to go to a trust attorney because if I leave you anything, they're going to take everything that I've worked for. So there are consequences that are far-reaching that when we think about how we're looking at crime and how we're addressing crime and how we're working, that we don't even realize the consequences that are left for our family to pick up. We don't think about those things. So my work every single day, since we passed the legislation here in Louisiana, we've been able to do it in 7 other states. We were able to get the Common App to remove the question. I've worked on Pell restoration for incarcerated students because I run a college and prison program in partnership with Tulane University. We're actually going through the accreditation process right now. The women's prison will now be a Tulane University site. And the women are working toward their Bachelor of Social Sciences through SOPA. So we're excited about that. We've been running that program for about 5 years. Due to my experience as a laboratory professional and understanding the extreme shortages in the profession, we've been able to partner with people like Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Kellogg Foundation, the Hilton Foundation, Ochsner Health System, and we've created a lab assistant program where we are training formerly incarcerated women for careers as a lab assistant and then the trajectory for career path. They can go all the way to medical school if that's what they choose to do. But, my story is one of what I try to work with young women and women who are incarcerated to leverage and let them know is that just because you have a dream, nobody sees it, nobody believes in it, nobody thinks that you can accomplish it. As long as you stay focused on executing what impact you want to have and making sure that you're not taking anything in this work personal, you can accomplish anything that you do. And, of course, a lot of prayer and right relationships and meeting great people always will propel you forward. And I don't know how many of you know, but I ran for U.S. Senate last year against John Kennedy and that whole 13 field of folks. I finished 4th. In the 13, I was the only woman. But that experience, the reason that I decided to run is all of my work on the federal level and federal legislation. I think that we don't have proper representation of who we in Louisiana are as a people. A lot of stuff that we see on TV are things that happen. It's not the Louisiana that I know. It's not the people that I see every day and that stand in the trenches and work with me every single day. And I ran for that reason. So I'm just greatly, deeply honored and appreciate the time to be able to talk and share with you all today. I hate standing up just talking. I love to be in conversation. I don't know what time we have, like I was intentional about not talking the whole 30 minutes because I do like to answer questions. Because a lot of times I don't know what people in the room need to hear if they're not able to ask me. Yeah, and whatever you want to ask is fine because I'm an open book. So, thank you.
First of all, your determination is inspiring. That was great.
Thank you.
We're happy to hear it. You mentioned in there about Tulane partnering with the women's college, and then you said something like it was an official Tulane
Hmm.
program. Is that unique, or is that normal? It seems like I don't think I've ever heard of a college partnering with a prison, but it sounds like a great idea.
Syrita, could you repeat the question so everybody can hear it, please?
Yeah, so he asked if the program at Operation Restoration in Tulane, if it's unique. So yes and no. There are colleges who have operated inside of prisons for a really long time, but when Pell, due to the 1994 crime bill, it went away. So people who are incarcerated were no longer eligible for Pell. So they went from hundreds of programs to about 6. With the restoration of Pell for incarcerated students, which we worked on through this Unlock Higher Ed Coalition, it takes place in July. A lot of programs are now able to begin to operate because their students can access Pell, just like any regular college student. What makes our program unique is that we started it at the nonprofit, and I hired Tulane to come in and teach the courses until we could work through Tulane buy-in, making sure the provost and all of the different individuals that we needed in order to operate a program, everybody was able to come to the table together and have total buy-in. So it took us about 5 years, right around the amount of time that the students have reached a credit limit. And so Tulane has, through their board of directors, you can only have so many credits outside of a Tulane campus before Tulane will not confer the degree. So we're currently under the process of going through SACS accreditation, where the prison will become a Tulane site, which is something that is also not something that is unique, because most places, they just operate inside of the prison and offer courses. They may have certificates and not full degree granting programs. The only in-person degree granting program in the history of the state of Louisiana has been the Baptist Theological Seminary, and that's it. Yes, ma'am.
Baton Rouge recently lost our one program for women called Connections for Life, and they have partnered, I think, with a similar organization in New Orleans. Because I'm in housing, subsidized housing, one of the biggest barriers for reentry is a place to live right after you get out with wraparound services that you can afford when you're on a job. Is housing and those kinds of services that actually start now in the prison and continue, is that part of your program?
Yes, ma'am. So we have about 15 programs at Operation Restoration where we address multiple different issues. We deal with housing insecurity, food insecurity, policy and advocacy, education issues. We believe that reentry starts on day one. So I have a staff of about 22 full-time employees. 2 of my staff members go into prison twice a month, and they begin working with anybody who's within a year of release to make sure that we identify like all of the needs that they have. The largest challenge, which people don't really talk about, and something that we are looking at challenging, is the federal definition of homelessness. So a person who is released from prison cannot be considered homeless because they've just lived in prison. So what we've been doing is working with different organizations and groups to house people for a short amount of time, so then you can get them to qualify for the federal definition of homelessness. But that has been the biggest stumbling block for reentry and people that are navigating the space. And then there's also a lot of low-income housing due to certain convictions, drug convictions. You can't access government housing anyway. So what we find in our organization is a lot of women who have lost custody of their children or don't have children, or the women that are living under the bridge and on the streets because they can't go to the women and children shelter, and then they can't qualify for homelessness services. And the missions aren't really safe for single women. Yes, ma'am. And then I'll come to you next. So the only qualification is a conviction. We help everyone. Last year, our final numbers were we worked with 1,187 women, and we provided over 7,780 services to these women and their families. We do a really in-depth assessment when we meet women, and we try to identify as many needs as possible. A lot of times people think that if they receive housing from us, they can't get food from us, or they can't get all of the other things. So we try to change that mindset of, we want you to come here and say all of the things that you're struggling for, and we develop a pretty in-depth plan of care to try to meet all of the needs. You know, we have an in-house saying that says that if you give someone an opportunity, you have to be invested in them taking advantage of the opportunity, because if you're not, it's as if you haven't given them one at all. So when someone says, hey, we want to hire folks, or we want to employ folks, we're the people that stand in the gap to make sure that they have transportation, they have childcare, they have food, they have all of the things that they need, uniform, shoes, in order to take the job. Because you can't just tell someone, here's a job, and they have 2 children at home, they have no transportation, and all of those things, and you look at it as like this person doesn't want to take the job, but it's like, realistically, they can't, because they have nowhere for their children to go. Another example is like in New Orleans, we provide bail support for folks, and we make sure that they, get to court. So every single person that we bonded out of jail, we have a 0 forfeiture rate. We have not forfeited a bond in 3 years. All of our participants show up and go back to court, but it was something as simple as, in New Orleans, you cannot bring children to court. So if you have a mother who has a child that's a young child that's not in school, or they can't afford daycare, they can't bring the child to court. So either they have to risk leaving the child in a car or somewhere, or hopefully they can find someone so they can go into court. So we partner with a daycare that has drop-in services where they can drop their children in. We cover the cost so that they can make it to court. And something as small as that has changed how our population goes back into the courtroom.
So are you in EDR, taking these services?
So we work statewide, but our base of operations is in New Orleans. So a lot of the services that we provide in East BR are like rapid response, where we support people with food. We'll support people with cell phones, clothing, hygiene items, all of those things. But for someone to have the intensive wraparound support that we provide, we would have to try to get them to New Orleans to meet with like our social workers and, different things of the sort. So we're always looking for opportunities to expand into other areas. It's just difficult. Capacity, I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure you're aware that the Huey and Angelina Wilson Foundation has a focus on recidivism. We've had previous speakers talk about this. Can you describe some of the networking you might do with some of these other similarly minded organizations?
Absolutely. And Huey and Angelina, I don't know if anybody is here from there. They have also been a great supporter of our lab assistant program. So really appreciate it. They funded us in the beginning to get it off the ground and get it started. So shout out to the Huey and Angelina Wilson Foundation as well. Thank you guys. I think one of our greatest strengths as an organization is that we do not want to do it alone. We believe in collaboration and partnering. One of the things that I'm the most proud of is we have a program at the organization called Operation Innovation, where we fiscally sponsor and support 26 other organizations and programs across the country, so not just here in Louisiana. Because a lot of times people are in communities, they know what their community needs, they just don't have the infrastructure and the back office support. So for my organization, we believe that scaling is not creating operation restorations in every single community. It is teaching people to execute in the way that we execute and making sure that they have the infrastructure and back office support to do so. So for us, that is what we believe scaling is. So that is one of the things that I'm the most proud of, is that we're able to meet people who are already doing great work in the community and continue to support them to do so. But I mean, we have a multitude of partnerships. We could never do it alone. So we partner with a lot of different organizations. And the other thing that we also do is, because we are intentional about the type of funding that we go after, we have rapid response for clients, but we also have rapid response resources for other community partners that we partner with. So we've had community partners that are like, hey, listen, we can't make payroll until this next grant comes in. Are you able to help us make that? We're like, sure. Another community partner came to us and like, listen, we're behind on our rent, our grant for the federal government, we haven't been able to get reimbursements. So not only do we provide like support for that community, we also make sure that our partners can continue to execute and do great work as well. Yes.
I certainly understand why you can't scale in every location. You mentioned about how you're providing services in Baton Rouge, but not necessarily the intensive wraparound services in the community. Let us know right now, what is it that's the holdup in Baton Rouge?
Probably somebody to lead the work, right? Because I can't be in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, everywhere. So if there's a leader that emerges, I am totally the person. I believe in there's no such thing as a compete clause. I can give you the blueprint, drop it down, introduce you to funders, help support. That is what I do on a regular basis for multiple people. It is really about having someone to step up and take ownership over the Baton Rouge area. Like we've just expanded into St. James and St. John because I'm from St. James. We're going into the jail in St. James. We're going to start going in the jail in St. John. We go to the prison. We're already here in Baton Rouge. We have a lab assistant component, again, thanks to the Hugh and Angelina Wilson Foundation. We just launched our in-prison component where we have 10 women who are currently incarcerated. They're set to graduate in the next month and a half. And will be released, and our hope is that they will be employed within hospital systems soon after their release, and they receive licensure. So we have little things in Baton Rouge that are happening, but it's somebody to take ownership. I know it was one more question, I think.
Right to the
Left?
left.
Oh, okay.
Are you connected with the Capital Area Reentry Coalition?
I am.
Hamilton?
Yes.
Y'all connected?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And the parole project?
Yes. Andrew. Yes. I know him really well. Anybody else? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Of the women and girls that you serve, how many are actually trying to go to school? And are they in degree programs or are they in training programs? And then how many are actually reaching out for employment, and if so, what kind of employment?
So there, what we understand and realize, especially like being in certain areas, we know that the illiteracy rates are really high in a lot of the communities. So in-house, we have a women's first clinic, is what we call it, and we work with people from early literacy all the way through their high set. We designed it as a special ed model where everyone is introduced the same concepts, but everyone has their own individualized lesson plan, and we introduce the concept at the level that they're at. So we start there. So we have programs that start as early as then. We have a demand to expand that program, but right now we only allow 10 women to be enrolled at a time. The Orleans Parish Sheriff Office, we go inside there. We started providing high-set services for their women that are incarcerated there. We make the initial contact, and then they meet us. They come back out in the community. We have training programs. We were the first SNAP ENT partner in Southeast Louisiana. And now we work directly with DCFS. So all SNAP ENT clients that show up for us, we can provide employment and training. Our training program is our lab assistant program. So thinking about careers in technical fields where they have extreme shortages. Our laboratory professions are one. We also have partnership with other employers. So we have folks that work with organizations like CEO Works in the hospitality industry, because whether someone wants to continue education or not, they have to work in order to be able to take care of themselves. So we also work with like soft skills training. We do financial coaching in-house. We have partnerships with Gulf Coast Bank and Chase, and we try to teach people about management and financial awareness. So we do that. Then we also have our college and prison program. We've had 4 women who have been released from prison, and we've navigated the space, and we've created a bridge program where they're able to still continue their education while outside of prison. So we buy books, we buy the computer, we help with housing, we do everything so that a person can really take a hold of the opportunity. But if you're looking for like hard numbers, I don't know where Dominique, oh, my assistant is back there. I'll have them for you before you leave. Any of the education statistics specifically that you need. How many people come to us for early literacy services, higher education services, SNAP, ENT, employment training, and all of those things. We keep pretty robust data at the organization.
Thank you so much.